stay anyway. You don't have to leave. But my little thought process on this talk is that we have some slides at our house.
Oh.
That my father was Jim Violet.
Yes.
Ellen Violet, right? And
Yeah.
so we have slides of when we moved from house
Oh.
up to Upper Main Street to make way for the shopping plaza. That would have been late 50s, possibly, or
Late
middle
50s, early
57s or something like that.
Yo, what's in the 50s?
Yeah.
That's what we moved to the new church, 63.
So 64.
All right. So anyway, I'll let you start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, those of a certain age may remember elocution lessons, and those of the younger age don't, I'm sure. But when I was a pre-teen, I took elocution lessons, and I wondered what the hell is this for? And today it's working. Thank you. If you have questions, you want to interrupt me, because most of my main thought is already down, so not a problem. First, I'd like to thank Tina for asking me to address the group. While I was aware that this marked the 100th year that my family has invested in real estate in Waterville, preparing for this put a lot of things into a different perspective, and I've tried to remember it in here. I've looked at the 3 generations of Rosenthals that have been involved, and I think of us as kind of a sandwich. My dad was Russian bred, my son Andy was Waterville bred, and I've been the ham in the middle for the past 60 years. As a prelude to the real estate venture, some background information is needed, and there it is. My grandfather, Hyman Rosenthal, lived in a small Russian village, Vinishok. It wasn't too small, however, for the Tsar to find him and give him an offer that he couldn't refuse, which was 20 years in the Russian army. And consequently, he snuck out of Russia and ended up in Waterville, Maine, where his brother-in-law, William Levine, lived. And although I knew him, because while I grew up, I lived within 1,000 feet of him, I'm amazed as I think back at it. He went into the junk business, but he never spoke English. He could understand English, and how he was able to deal with the people and barter back and forth on what they're going to pay for junk and stuff. It amazes me that he was able to do it, but he did it well enough so that after a year, he was either able to borrow or made enough money so he could send for his wife and his daughter, Ida and Rose, and my father, who was on the end here. And my father was 6 years old when he got to Waterville. Spoke no English. When he was 9 years old and in the 3rd grade, his father developed cancer and went to New York for treatment. My dad dropped out of 3rd grade and ran the company business for about 3 months. I don't know how well he ran it, but it was still there at the end of 3 months. His father came back. However, Miss Engel, who was his teacher at Brook Street School, and who retired the year she would have had me. But anyway, she told him he would have to repeat the 3rd grade because he had missed 3 months of school. And that ended his formal education. He actually was a graduate in 2nd grade. So he went to work in the full-time junk business, and despite the fact that he had no further formal education, he put his sister and his brother through college and his brother through medical school. who had gotten married. Some of his customers in the junk business were woolen mills. There were over 100 of them in the state of Maine in those days. And they began offering him wool waste along with the junk. Initially, he had no idea what wool waste was, and so he would take a sample and bring it to another mill and see if he could get more money than these people were willing to sell it for. And if he could, he'd go back and collect it and sell it. Eventually, he learned what he was doing, and he got to know the value of various wastes, and left the junk business to concentrate on wool waste. Eventually, he was one of the largest wool waste dealers in the country. And this served him well during the Depression because it was a means for woolen mills to lower the cost of their goods by using waste. And consequently, there was a market for it. As time went on, he would make blends of different wastes so that he could make 10,000, 20,000 pounds that would be usable as one blend. And eventually, the time would come when he couldn't find a buyer for it. And so he would go to a mill that didn't have business, and he would bring his blends and have them make them into camp blankets. And that way he went into the camp blanket business. And I recall, as a youngster, us shipping blankets, camp blankets, to Sears, to Penny's, by the freight car load. And that was a huge business until everyone put in central heating and just needed a light blanket. Eventually, there was a woolen mill in Vermont that went out of business, or was going out of business. And my dad bought that rather than have them work on commission. And we were in the woolen business, cloth manufacturing business, making women's wear, outer coating, and also blankets. Eventually, he owned mills in North Montpelier, Vermont, which was the original one, Pittsfield, Maine, Fairfield, Oakland, Lewiston, North Adams, Massachusetts, and finally Conisty, South Carolina, as well as a woolen mill in Northborough. And we were in that business, or he was in that business, until the early 70s. However, during all of this time, he always had a passion for real estate. His favorite expression was, they don't make any more land. And as a result, while he was still in his teens, he heard that George K. Bartel, who was the local banker, wanted to sell his farm. And he went to see him, and Mr. Bartel told him there was an option on it. And so he said, when does it expire? And Mr. Bartel told him. And he showed up at noon on that day, and the option hadn't been exercised. And so he bought it. And knowing my dad, I think he bought it by borrowing the money from George K. Bartel. And in the early days before he was old enough to legally sign for loans, the bankers would loan money to him, but then his dad would have to come in and sign for it to make it legal. However, they knew that they were doing business with my dad and not with the father. Following his service in France in the First World War, 100 years ago in 1919, he began what is now 100 years of Waterville real estate ventures, building Roosevelt Avenue, which first that's the house I grew up in on Roosevelt Avenue. I'm sorry. And the first street that he built was the original Roosevelt Avenue. This is the extension and the way it was built. It was named after Theodore, by the way, which was his hero. Then after that, he built Johnson Heights, which was named after the president of Colby at that time. time. And then Eustis Boulevard, which was named after the treasurer of Colby. Finally, he built Rupert Street, which he named after his sister who died in a car accident in Wells, Maine, after her husband came back from the war and they were leaving to their home in Chicago. They had a single car accident down Wells and she died. During that same period of time, he developed parts of Bay Street, Abbott Street, as well as individual houses and lots that he would buy. During the Depression, he sold houses for as low as $3,000 a house, with $100 down to pay the legal fees, and 20 years to pay off the balance and 6% interest. It was during the Depression, and banks wouldn't loan money on the houses, so he carried all of these. And it was his textile business that enabled him to do the real estate business, which he really enjoyed. And I can remember every month as a preteen and a teenager, people coming to the house and giving him monthly rental deposit. And during the entire period, he was involved in over 300 houses or house lots. And throughout the Depression and everything else, he only took a single one back. And that was because the husband and wife who bought it got divorced, moved out of state, and just abandoned it. In a lot of cases, I can remember over 2 years going by when people were unable to pay, and eventually caught up, and he had no failures other than that single house. We went out of the single lot business 50 years ago, but the 300 lots that he was involved in constitute about 8% of all the single lots in the city. Along the way, he purchased the Waterville Iron Works and knew nothing about, it was a foundry and a machine shop. He knew nothing about either, but he purchased it, ran it successfully for a number of years until urban renewal came and took the property. He also did a 9-hole golf course, although he never played golf. He also did a miniature golf course, which is what that is.
Where was that for?
That was on Main Street, right past where I lived. It was 304 Main Street. Actually, yes, 304 Main Street was the clubhouse. Frankly, the reason that he built it was at that time the Waterville Country Club was considered to be difficult for Jews to get into. And so he built this, and as you see on one of these signs, it's 25 cents to plant it. So it was pretty tough competition. And he kept it until after the Second World War, when that stigma disappeared and it wasn't needed anymore. One College Avenue, that was an interesting building. That was a Buick agency going back before the Second World War. And I remember it was, you would drive up to it and toot your horn, and the garage door would open, and you would drive in onto a Lazy Susan, and they would fill your car up with gas, and then they would manually turn you around and head you out, and you'd drive up. It worked. I can't imagine it passing any of the laws today, but it worked while it did. Eventually, as you know, it became kind of set after a number of years as a furniture store. After I got out of the Air Force in 1953, I joined the family textile business. And my dad and I were in New York on a business trip, some time, and we were WT grants, which again, for those of you of a certain age will remember, it was the third largest chain of stores in the country after Sears and Montgomery Watts. It was the third largest. It wasn't popular down south, but in this part of the world, it was big. Except Waterville, Maine did not have a WT grant. It was about the only city in the state of Maine that didn't have one. And so he and I went in to see the real estate manager there in New York without an appointment, and told him that we were there to see if we could build a WT grants from. He knew more about the city of Waterville than I did. Without expecting us, without anything else, he didn't look up anything. He said that the only place he would go in Waterville was the Emory Brown building, and that we would have to buy it at $100,000 or less to make economic sense to go for it. So we came back to Waterville and got an option for $100,000. And on our next trip to New York, we went in and saw him, and he said, since you were here, the WT Grant Board decided we would no longer go into any downtown. We would only go into shopping centers. So we said, well, as long as you only go into shopping centers, we have land we can build. And we told him where it was, and he said, oh, well, if you can get a supermarket to go with us, we will go. So we came back, and we eventually got First National Stores to come here. And we had WT grants, and we got into problems. First of many problems involved in construction and in real estate development. But this particular problem was, while we were trying to find a supermarket, we went to the real estate vice president in charge of the Columbia Markets. That, again, was a chain here in Maine going back then. And he played us along for several months, telling us that he was interested in Central. Finally telling us that he really didn't have any interest. The company didn't have any interest, but he was working a one-year notice because he was going to go out and he was going to help people build shopping centers. And we should continue making women's wear, and he would build shopping centers for us. He put on a very nice appearance, and we fell for it. And as a result, we worked along with him, and we told him, well, Shaw's wants to come in. And we knew it because we were friendly with the president of Shaw's, and he had told us that. One day, we got a call from him telling us that he had put First National Stores in. And we said, First National Stores isn't what we want, because they already have a location downtown, and they'll be dividing their business. He said, no, I bought their location downtown, and this will be good. Well, he hadn't bought their location downtown, and it wasn't good. But they eventually sold to Hannaford, and Hannaford is there. Actually, not on the original lease, but we did the release. But this was the original store, which was 22,000 feet, and now it's 45,000 feet. Then one day he told us, I made arrangements with Mammoth Mart. And we said, well, Mammoth Mart is financeable. We could have had them, but we turned them down because they're not financeable. I know of a construction company down in Massachusetts who has some equipment available, and they were planning to build in Waterville over on Kennedy Drive, and he said, they'll lease your land. And we said, well, will he pay us? He told us. We said, well, we'd like to talk to them. He said, well, I represent them. You won't do any good to talk to them. This is what they'll pay you. So we said, well, if you represent them, you don't represent us. And he said, well, they've got land over at JFK, and they'll move the center over there immediately if you don't go on with it. And so we needed a partner, mainly to give us backbone. And we found a fellow down in Portland who was in the construction business, and we built the first part of the center with him. He eventually sold out to another individual, and that other individual, we probably paid 50% more than we would have paid to anyone else to get rid of him, because we couldn't expand the center or do anything while he was a partner. Sometime after that, an attorney from Augusta, as I recall, was very early in the morning, had the legislature pass an amendment to the TIF, which is tax incremental financing, which changed the law that had originally been made for manufacturing and giving a tax benefit so that it would include shopping centers. I was against it then, I'm against it now, but within 3 or 4 weeks of the time that passed, the city of Augusta gave one of the largest developers in the country $8 million on a piece of land that I had an auction on years earlier, a couple of years earlier, and which required a tremendous amount of groundwork, and you're probably all familiar with it. It's North Augusta, and it's the Walnut and that whole thing. And so once that happened, Waterville and our shopping center was actually unable to compete, because people would come to us and we would give them a price, and they could get it done for much cheaper than Augusta. And we went to the city of Waterville to ask for a TIF. And as I said, I didn't believe in it, but once you started, we wanted an equal playing field. It was around that time that one of our mayors said to us, haven't you made enough money in Waterville? And that sort of gave us a feeling. And in retrospect, I probably should thank him and the city for having said that, because up until that time, we had developed basically in Waterville, with very few exceptions, Waterville area. But since we couldn't develop here, we looked around, and we developed in Augusta, we developed in Lincoln, we developed in Belfast, we developed in Freeport, we developed in Portland. But then we went to Brunswick, and we put in a 300,000 foot shopping center there, a 184 unit motel, complete with a 300 seat dining area and banquet space for 1,500, along with a number of small stores and along with a multiplex theater. And we were developer of the year, and Brunswick was very pleased with us. And then following that, we went to Lewiston, where we already owned and operated about 700,000 feet of industrial buildings. And we developed a 300,000 square foot shopping center there, along with small store sites. The city of Millinocket asked us to come up and develop a center there, and we went up there and put in a 100,000 square foot center, along with an 80 unit motel. Around this time, Dick Kelso, who was in development direction for Waterville, approached us to see if we would start development again back in Waterville, as a little retail work had been done from the time it stopped. We explained that we weren't competitive, and he said, if I get you a TIF, would you do something? And he got us a TIF. And as a result, we were able to add 50,000 square feet to the Grand Store, along with some strip stores, completely rebuild and enlarge the small center across the street, and build a 65,000 square foot indoor tennis and health club, along with a restaurant and nightclub. Then during the plane trip once, and I don't remember where I was coming from or going to, I happened to be on the same plane as an old friend who had been the original real estate person for CES, but it consisted of one store. And he was with them the next 20 years, then he left. And I was able to talk him into, he had left that field and he had become a developer. And I was able to talk him into putting together the shopping center that's next to us, which is the Walmart and the Home Depot Center, which we couldn't develop because we were limited by lease restrictions as to what we could have put there. We couldn't have put in a Walmart, for example. And again, it was only because we were able to turn the TIF over to him that made it possible. Without the TIF, it would never have happened. Between the center across the street, between the Walmart Center and El Plaza, we were involved in approximately 800,000 feet of retail shopping space in Waterville, or about 60% of all the space in the city of shopping centers. When the Halfway Shirt Company moved from its original location, we purchased the building on Appleton Street and transformed it into 39 apartments. This was in a time of much more lax restrictions. And I remember walking on the floor with the fellow in charge of construction for us with some chalk and deciding, well, let's put a room here and let's put a room there. And then after we had done it there, we had to put on paper so we could apply for a permit. But it worked, and it's been successful ever since. We also had some land opposite the Thayer Hospital on the river. Rather than develop it ourselves, we went down to Boston and found a developer down there who built close to 100 apartments. In addition to that, we built 2 Section 8 housing projects in the city, one of them being on my grandfather's junkyard. And we added close to 180 multi-unit housing units to the city over the years. At one point, I read an article in Fortune magazine that there was a new chain that was building hotels across the country and down in Memphis, Tennessee. I called them and offered to build one for them in Waterville. That eventually led to 120-unit Holiday Inn on Upper Main Street. We later built a 100-unit Atrium Motel on Main Street, so that we have been involved in about 50% of the motel units in the city. Along the way, we purchased the old Foss Hall on College Avenue from Colby. We had plans to convert it into a modern office building. However, the diocese approached us as it hoped to convert it into a parochial school. And so we turned it over to them at our cost to help them out. Lewis also donated the land on which the Thayer Hospital was built. in summary, my dad, Louis, I, and my son Andrew have developed for just 100 years this year in Waterville. And the family has been involved in 8% of all the single home housing lots in the city, around 180 multifamily apartments, an uncounted large number of houses, 50% of the motel units, and 60% of the shopping center space, along with a number of individual retail restaurant units and 12,000 feet of office space. And that's pretty much the story. Any questions? We used to make baseball yarn, a yarn that goes into the baseballs. And every year we would get an order for 10,000 pounds. And 10,000 pounds sounds like a hell of a lot of baseballs. And we thought we were probably making the yarn from those baseballs that we saw around. Until one day, and this was with a company in Missouri, who we never met. We just talked over the phone and we got the order every year, and that was it. He was up in Maine on vacation, and he dropped in to see us. And he told us how much they liked our yarn and our service and all this and that. But the color was wrong. And we said, why does color make any difference? He says, because the way baseballs are sold is they cut a section out of them, like an orange. And he said, you open it up and you see what color is in there. And he said, and if a baseball player is having a bad streak and isn't hitting the ball well, and for some reason the cover comes off, and they see the color of the yarn is different, that's the reason. The yarn isn't the right color. So he told us that what we needed was a blue-gray yarn, and we turned it into, we began making a blue-gray yarn, and from 10,000 pounds, we went the next year to 100,000 pounds. It was just, if he hadn't come up to me, we never would have known. Yes?
Where was your golf course located?
The golf course was at 304 Main Street, where my house used to be.
Okay, from there down.
Oh, from there, it was up where the shopping center is, and it went all the way down to where the Thayer Hospital is. It was a 9-hole golf